In a shocking twist, the meat industry has been caught secretly derailing climate action. That was a joke, it's not a twist. We've known they were doing this for a while. But there's a new report by Changing Markets on how big meat is using the same playbook as the tobacco and fossil fuel industries to prevent the transformation of our food system. The report is over 200 pages long, and I think everyone should read it, but obviously that's not going to happen, which is why I'm making this video. We're going to cover why we need to transform the food system in the first place, the tactics the meat and dairy industries are using to prevent this, like misinformation and fear-mongering, and at the end I'll cover how we've seen these same tactics against our ballot initiatives with Pro-Animal Future in Denver. Why do we need to change our food system at all? If you're watching this video, you're probably aware of animal rights issues, but this report focuses on the climate. The science is clear that we cannot reach the goals set by the Paris Agreement unless we significantly reduce methane emissions and consumption of animal products, which are both projected to increase. In terms of damage to the environment, methane is not the only issue. The meat industry negatively impacts biodiversity, causes deforestation, and takes up half of the world's habitable land. I'm not even going to talk about pandemics, but that's a huge concern as well. Despite this, big meat has been mostly let off the hook in terms of environmental regulation, and that is not an accident. It's been carefully orchestrated by industry executives, and today you're going to learn how they did it. Their strategies are broken down into 3 sections: distract, delay, and derail. Let's start with distract. Wait, what was I talking about? You've probably heard of greenwashing, which is where companies make vague claims that their products are more environmentally friendly than they actually are. Meat and dairy products advertise as carbon neutral or climate positive without providing any evidence. The most outrageous example was a type of beef jerky, which is one of the most carbon-intensive products available and was sold under Amazon's climate-friendly pledge on the grounds that they had removed some of the air from their packaging, even though it was non-recycled plastic. You've probably seen the pro-meat influencers all over social media, and this is also orchestrated by the industry. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association has a Master of Beef Advocacy program, which I'm currently enrolled in and making a video about, so definitely subscribe if you want to see that. And this course has helped to create an army of influencers who spread pro-meat talking points and misinformation about plant-based meat all over the internet. The dairy industry is particularly concerned about influencing younger people because Gen Z doesn't buy as much milk. Maybe they've realized it's weird to impregnate cows and steal their babies so we can breastfeed from a different species. But the dairy industry thinks what they do is completely normal, so they've launched campaigns using various celebrities like Sean Evans, Mr. Beast, and Aubrey Plaza. Another distraction tactic big meat employs is to use their own scientific arguments to downplay animal farming's impact on the climate. They use academic institutions like UC Davis, Colorado State University, and others to conduct studies that are then used to legitimize their talking points. You've probably heard some of these talking points, but a few of them were new to me. One that we're all familiar with is regenerative agriculture, which claims that cows actually help the environment by regenerating soil, but of course they don't have the evidence to back it up. There's quite a lot of evidence against it, including a recent paper that found you'd have to return 135 billion metric tons of carbon to the soils to balance out the amount of methane emitted annually by grazing animals. That amount is roughly equal to all the carbon lost due to agriculture over the last 12,000 years. It's just not realistic. One term I was unfamiliar with was GWP asterisk, or global warming potential. The scientific community uses a number of metrics to assess and compare the impacts of various greenhouse gases. GWP 100, for example, looks at methane's impact over 100 years, which has 30 times the warming potential of CO2. The meat industry has been pushing a new metric, GWP, which only reflects changes in the current level of methane entering the atmosphere. Since methane only lasts in the atmosphere for 12 years, they can argue that it's okay to keep levels constant. This ignores the fact that over a 20-year time frame, methane is 80 times more potent than CO2, and the global methane pledge calls for a 30% reduction in methane emissions by 2030. If we can reduce methane, it will help buy more time to take climate action before we reach critical tipping points. The adoption of GWP means the meat industry can use it to keep their current emissions stable or slightly reduce them and claim rewards for continuing to pollute, albeit slightly less. One of the UC Davis hacks, Frank Mitloehner, Look at this stupid grin. Even this cow knows he's full of shit. Anyway, he's argued that we can use cows to cool the environment. This goes against the wider scientific consensus, but Frank is doing his own research at UC Davis and using it to encourage the adoption of GWP both nationally and internationally. It's a concern for a few reasons. The biggest is that it lets these huge polluters off the hook while disadvantaging developing countries who would be punished for even small increases in emissions. One climate scientist put it like this: imagine a house is on fire and someone is actively pouring gas on the fire. They then pour a little less gas and want credit for doing so despite still feeding the fire. Perhaps they claim that they are now fire neutral. As you can see, the narratives Big Meat uses are being continuously reinvented to direct attention away from animal agriculture and toward other sectors. While the industry distracts consumers, policymakers, and shareholders with unsubstantiated claims, they also use delay tactics to slow down any government intervention by claiming they're already taking action on their own. Just don't bring up methane, because they prefer to focus on other strategies, which have a lower impact. When they do talk about methane, they highlight technological solutions like feed additives instead of reducing their herds. You've probably heard about feeding seaweed to cows to reduce methane, but that's just one of the many solutions they've tried. Of course, at the end of the day, they're still emitting methane. When it comes time to actually invest in new technologies, the meat industry is reluctant to foot the bill. They prefer to ask taxpayers to do it. In the US, huge corporations are receiving subsidies for feed additive trials through the Inflation Reduction Act. All right, I wasn't sure if this was going to make it into this video, but we have to talk about it. We have to talk about the poop. Basically, we have a lot of poop. So much poop. There are literal poop lagoons that are destroying communities. So why don't we take that poop and turn it into fuel? Then we can use that instead of fossil fuels and become carbon negative by 2030. If you think that idea would never be taken seriously, you're absolutely wrong. The state of California has already spent $600 million building facilities to convert manure into biogas. Meat industry executives have claimed that biogas is cleaner than wind and solar, but in reality it releases CO2 like fossil fuels. It's also flammable, explosive, and highly toxic to breathe. While the meat industry pretends to care about sustainability, the reality is that they don't want things to change. They're going to continue to hype unproven technologies and resist substantial transformation like reducing their herds and switching to plant-based proteins. When regulations actually threaten their business model, they know it's time to derail. Now we're going to look at some of the more aggressive tactics and see how they've been weaponized to undermine climate policy. All of these tactics are only possible due to the idea of agricultural exceptionalism, which allows the industry to operate under a different set of rules than other parts of the economy. Agricultural exceptionalism is based on romanticized notions of farming that are perpetuated in everyday life. Old MacDonald had a farm, happy animals on cartons of milk, and the idea that we have to do this to animals in order to feed a hungry world. Big Ag uses this romanticized idea as a shield to hide the realities of industrial farming. The positive perception of the meat industry gives them access to power and the ability to wield it in ways that serve their bottom line. They've managed to derail almost every policy that would force them to change using government connections, lobbies, and fear-mongering. This investigation revealed several high-profile cases of revolving doors, where representatives of the meat and dairy industry hold political positions in the government bodies that are supposed to be regulating them. So essentially, they're regulating themselves. One example is the United States Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. He was a dairy industry lobbyist, then the Secretary of Agriculture under Obama, then president of a dairy lobby group, and now he's Secretary of Agriculture under Biden. During this time, he's failed to stop factory farm consolidation, which put smaller farms out of business. He's promoted voluntary action and methane digesters, which we know don't work. He's continued to support giant meat corporations like JBS, even when they were involved in bribery, price fixing, and fraud. He vehemently opposed the idea of reducing animal production, and during a conference call at COP28, said that the Biden administration will be aggressive in response to those who seek to restrict or reduce animal protein consumption. Tom is just one lobbyist of many, and they're all actively derailing changes that will affect the meat industry. On the rare occasion that policies make it past the lobbyists, big meat resorts to fear-mongering. While most environmental policies would only affect large corporations, the industry threatens that any change will put small family farmers out of business. There have been farmer protests all across Europe, which became the political justification used to drop long-promised and urgently needed policies like the ones in the Green Deal. Some protests have turned violent, with farmers spraying manure, destroying statues, and setting fire in the street. When climate protesters do that, they get arrested, but when farmers do it, they get meetings with high-level politicians who fulfill their demands at the expense of climate action that would protect future generations. There's also fear-mongering surrounding alternative proteins like plant-based and lab-grown meat. This narrative has hurt plant-based meat sales and influenced Italy to ban lab-grown meat by painting it as a plot by Bill Gates and the global elite to control people and make them weaker. They've also tied animal meat with traditional values and spread misinformation at key moments during the legislative process, which suggests targeted campaigns. While our climate continues to get worse with droughts, wildfires, and hurricanes intensifying in the US, big meat is doing whatever it takes to derail any action. It's a bit ironic considering how dependent their industry is on the climate. They've managed to avoid consequences for their actions for decades, but unlike governments, the climate doesn't care about their feelings. Now I want to talk about how these tactics are playing out against our ballot initiatives in Denver, which is super interesting to see. We're running an initiative to ban slaughterhouses, which would shut down the largest industrialized lamb slaughterhouse in the country. It's run by Superior Farms, and when we go to their website, you can immediately see the greenwashing. Sustainability, the environment. What the fuck? Lamb is literally one of the worst things you could eat for the climate. It's second only to beef in terms of emissions. When you go to the sustainability page, there's no mention of methane, and they claim that they're good for the environment because the lamb isn't imported, but fail to disclose that they export lamb to New Zealand and Japan. They've also gotten Colorado State University, a huge agricultural school, to create skewed research about our measure, saying that it would cost taxpayers $861 million, which is absolutely insane. If you want to hear more about the study's flaws, check out my interview on Ross Kaminsky. When we go to their campaign website, we can see more fear-mongering. And won't someone think of the children? There's no mention of the increased rates of PTSD, depression, and substance abuse we see among slaughterhouse workers. The CEO of the slaughterhouse has also said that they're going to try to get politicians to overturn the ban if it actually passes, so derailment is already in the works. I can't wait to see how the rest of the campaign plays out, but I'm curious to hear what you think. What can we do to fight this huge industry? Are you surprised by anything in this report? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to help us at Pro Animal Future, please donate today.